Alrighty, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first Learn One New Thing webinar, where we are going live from the Ag Leader Academy to share one new thing every week. My name is Sydney Baxter, and I am a training specialist here at the Ag Leader Academy. I am accompanied by two of my coworkers, both Kevin Carlson and Hannah Carlson. They'll be managing the chat, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. If you'll give me just one moment to share my screen, I'll pull all the information up that we'll be working with today in our Learn One New Thing webinar. Alrighty, so I believe you can see my screen here. Right now, what I have pulled up is SMS tutorial or SMS. In this Learn One New Thing webinar, we'll be going over new topics each week that we'll be covering, and we hope you learn one new thing every time we cover a topic. This week, we're going to be covering the importance of boundaries. Whether you have been using SMS for years or you have just downloaded the software or you're an AgFiniti user that has just started, there's certainly one new thing that you can learn each week in our series. This is a free series. It will be recorded. It is bi-weekly. So you can tune in again on June 18th. For today's topic, we'll be covering boundaries. Boundaries are so incredibly important to the software as they help us with both software related topics and hardware related topics. So on the software side, as we begin to read in files, boundaries are going to be important to organizing and categorizing all of our data that's read into the software into the appropriate grower, farm, and field. And then whenever it comes to hardware, whenever we send out our data to AgFiniti or we send our data from AgFiniti or SMS out to the display, it's certainly going to help us load our prescriptions, generate those prescriptions within the software and then plant according to those prescriptions out in the field. Boundaries are also going to help us with hardware related things such as turn path or right spot or auto swath. So ensuring we have proper and accurate boundaries is going to be critical to data management, and then reading it back into the software will save you headaches in the future. One question we commonly get is this meeting recorded? This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the playlist. So if you missed something or you want to go back and refresh, you can view this recording in the Learn One New Thing playlist on YouTube. For now, let's get started with SMS. Alrighty. So you should be able to see my SMS here. And within SMS, the desktop software that AgLeader provides as a data management platform, we're going to be working with two tools for boundaries, both freeze boundary and trace boundary. Now, there are YouTube tutorials over both of these two topics, which I will reference later after we walk through them. But it's an excellent reminder to begin talking about boundaries, that we have two options, freeze boundary, trace boundary. Now, the first one I'm going to walk you through is freeze boundary. And to preface, freeze boundary uses existing operation data and freezes the boundary, adding an extra half a swath width to the outside of the operations data. We'll look at the Taden field boundary under Grower Meyer here. Let me pull his data up. And one thing to note about boundaries is we can immediately notice whether or not a field has a field boundary whenever we see it in the preview window towards the bottom of the screen here. Now, the Taden field boundary, if you can see here, does not have a field boundary. If we click on the field level, we can see in the preview window it's simply a green polygon. Since the green polygon does not have a black outline, that means it does not have an official set field boundary. We need to set the official field boundary by using the freeze boundary tool. You'll notice in the Taden field, I have 1997 grain harvest, so I'll be using that operations data to freeze the boundary. Now give it a moment. I did open SMS just a second ago, so it's going to take some time to process that data and create a map. Once we have our map created, we can ensure that it is the operation we would like to use for freeze boundary. Once we make sure that we have this boundary, it's the one, or once we make sure we have the operation and it's the one we want, we can go back up to the field level. Freeze boundary only works at the field level. Right click and choose freeze boundary. You'll see freeze boundary is in the list here, along with other boundary tools. Now, one thing to note about these boundary tools is they are not available to click on. That's because we would have to be at a different level of the management tree in order to click on these options. Freeze boundary is available at the field level, so let's go ahead and choose freeze boundary. What this is going to do in the background, SMS is going to look at the operation data that we have in the management tree, and it's going to add an extra half a swap width to the outermost data points. So we have our grain harvest data. Across the entire outside of the field, it's going to add an extra half a swath width, whatever that was, for the combine header that was harvesting this field. I'll create a map quickly to illustrate how it froze the boundary and added that extra half a swath width. It's easy to see if we turn the transparency down. And I'll zoom in to the west or east side of the field here. Once my satellite imagery caches in the background, you can easily see where the field ended and where the boundary added that extra or where freeze boundary added that extra half a swath width. A good use case for freezing the boundary would be if you don't have an official set field boundary, but you do have operation data that might not be completely accurate because of the data source or because of the correction source it was recorded with. Freeze boundary is useful for fields that do not have set field boundaries that need to enclose all of the data that you would like to use moving forward to be the official set field boundary. If you have any questions about freeze boundary, please drop those in the chat now. Kevin and Hannah will be managing that chat and will respond to you as quickly as possible. For now, I'm going to move right along into trace boundary, which is our more accurate tool for creating an official set field boundary using existing operation data. I'm going to collapse my management tree and close out of all my maps to start fresh. And then the field I would like to demo this on is going to be the east field under Dan Henning. We know that this field does not have a field boundary by going to the preview window at the bottom after we click on the field and seeing that it doesn't have a black outline. Because it doesn't have an official set field boundary, we'll need to set it, and we're going to do that using trace boundary. Remember what I said about freeze boundary and how it adds the extra half a swath width. With trace boundary, it's going to record each of the outermost data points and trace along those data points, making this a more accurate boundary. This would be ideal for the highest level of correction source that the data was recorded with. So if you upgraded, previously you froze all of your boundary using the freeze boundary tool, but then you upgraded your correction source and you planted using RTK. A great example for using trace boundary would be to trace the planting operations data set to use as your official set field boundary using the trace boundary tool. Let me show you what that means on this E East field here. So if I click into the E East field, I notice I have 1997 grain harvest. Now this is the operation I'm going to demonstrate tracing for you. Hopefully you use the most up-to-date year though to trace your field boundary. For this example, I do need to click all the way down to the operation level. It's important that I do that because at the field level, you'll notice trace boundary is not available. However, at the operation level, trace boundary becomes available, whereas freeze boundary is no longer available. Once I'm at the operation level, I can choose trace boundary, and it's going to take me to a dialog where I can choose between the sensitivities. I can choose between the default fine, medium, or coarse settings, which I'll demonstrate to you after we get through this window, or you can choose a manual setting. A manual setting allows you to enter in your own gap diameter and interior area, whereas the default sensitivities have those pre-populated in the background for you to use. For this example, I'm going to use a medium trace and choose OK. What this does in the background is SMS is going to look at the data set we opened here, this operation, and it's going to trace around the outside of that operations data. Now, if I go back to the east field at the field level, you'll notice that it has a black outline surrounding the field and some black outlines on the inside of the field. Why did those black lines occur? Because as we were recording this data moving through the field, maybe our on or start stop delays were present, or we had some GPS dropout that gave us some gaps in the field. Using the medium sensitivity, SMS went ahead and traced those interior areas using predefined settings to create this map that has the outlines. I'm going to show you 3 different examples of the fine, medium, and coarse setting if you just give me a moment to open each of them. All right, so as you should see on the software here, I have created a map of the fine, medium, and coarse settings. Now, because this is training data, we do have each of these saved in our customer training project. Normally, if you were to trace this in your own software, you would be seeing the fine, medium, or coarse, not all three. I'll click through the maps to show you the difference between fine, medium, and coarse here. The first setting, which is fine, is the most detailed trace. You can see here any single waterway or GPS dropout or where the header might have been raised too early or lowered too soon would be where it's tracing using the fine sensitivity setting. With a medium trace, it's going to look a little differently as it fills in more of those gaps. The gap diameter and interior area that we mentioned previously that you could set manually if you so choose is going to be a little more lenient, allowing for fewer dropouts within the field. Now with the course setting, you'll notice that very few waterways are traced within the field boundary, and we simply have two waterways that are probably legitimate waterways instead of GPS dropout points. If you have any questions about the fine, medium, or coarse setting, fine, medium, or coarse settings on boundary sensitivities, please drop those in the chat at this time. I'm going to move on to editing boundary. Whenever you have a boundary, say you traced it using operation data previously, you might need to edit it. So in the event that you have a jagged field edge like you see on the west side of the field here, or your boundary cuts in on the south side of the field here, you might need to edit this boundary to smooth out those lines. That way, whenever you're kicking this back out to the display for a prescription, so to speak, you can have a nice, pretty straight line across the bottom. You can do so by right-clicking anywhere on the map, choosing Edit Layer, and you'll notice the boundary editor comes up. Now with this boundary editor, here's where you can begin to select these specific vertices along the west side of the field or the south side of the field to edit using your tools on the right side of the screen here. Right, I'm going to try a different sharing method because you cannot see what I am seeing within this boundary editor. You should be able to see the boundary editor now on my screen, where you can see the west side of the field has a few jagged edges that we'll be editing out, along with the south side of the field having a few vertices that cut into the field. We'll ensure that we are on the select vertex, select type, and then I'm going to choose a polygon. And within this polygon, I'm going to enclose all of the data points in which I wish to edit, or in this case, delete, and I'm going to right click. Once I right click, you'll notice these vertices are red. They turn red, meaning they are selected. Once I have those vertices selected, I can then use my edit tools on the right side of the screen to delete these vertices out. Once those vertices are deleted, you'll notice I can zoom to this edge of the field, and that edge of the field has been straightened out. Now, let's say I wanted to enclose all of this area here into this field boundary. So I need to move my vertices further to the west. I can do so by continuing with my Select Vertex tool, choosing a specific point, selecting that point, and shifting it to the west. I'll do so with the following vertices. That way I can have a nice, pretty edge on the field here. I'm going to zoom to world to show you the entire map here. Maybe I want to do some editing to the south side of this field. I'll do so by choosing edit poly, or by selecting the polygon here and deleting out these vertexes that are causing that jagged edge. Now, if you wanted to know more about editing the boundary, you can watch a YouTube tutorial called Edit Boundaries on the SMS tutorial page. Once you've made all the edits that you would like, you can set this as your official set field boundary by choosing Set Field Boundary towards the bottom, saving the grower, farm, and field in which you'd like this boundary to be saved to. So this was the east field, and choosing Accept. After you've set it as the official set field boundary, save and close out of this dialog to save your changes and have this boundary with the nice smooth edges here as the official set field boundary once you click back to the east field at the field level. That was freeze boundary, trace boundary, and editing boundaries within SMS. Again, at this time, I'm going to invite you to put any questions you might have about those three topics in regards to SMS desktop software in the chat at this time. I'll be switching screens to discuss boundaries within AgFiniti, which you should be able to see now. And AgFiniti is our cloud-based data management software through AgLeader. With this platform, we do have some sample data preloaded in. That way you can see how to use boundaries within AgFiniti. Again, boundaries are so important to everything we do at AgLeader. They're important for managing our data by organizing it when we're reading in files year after year. Boundaries are important on the hardware side and out in the field for ensuring we apply the right rate as we are applying our prescriptions throughout the field, or achieving the turn path, which we recently came out with on the steering side of things. So making sure we have the proper boundary set is so important within the software for the setup of our operation. We can ensure that we have a field boundary by using existing operation data similar to SMS. Within AgFiniti, you'll want to have your operations data pulled up. You know that it doesn't have a field boundary if you check. You might skim through your years. Maybe you recorded a boundary operation, but you don't see it here. A great way to check would be to go to all years, looking under the operation filter here, and I do not see it at the top. This means I don't have a boundary operation, and I need to set an official set field boundary. Once I set the official set field boundary, I can begin analyzing my data within AgFiniti. I'll filter this back to the 2020 grain harvest, which was pulled up on the screen that you can see here. And I want to set the boundary based on this operation data. I can do so by going into the wrench at the very top of the screen and choosing Boundary Manager within the dropdown. Now in the Boundary Manager, you'll notice we do not have any existing boundaries here. Once we do have boundaries, they'll be listed under this black header here, but because we do not, we will need to create one using one of the three options at the top. We have the option to trace the map, which is what we'll be using for the existing operation data. If we didn't have any operation data, and let's say we just wanted to download soil survey data for a specific field, maybe we were just checking it out, we haven't quite completed any operations in there yet, but we wanted to have soil survey data to reference in the future, we could certainly draw a new boundary using our cursor and the screen and satellite imagery to draw a new boundary. Or you can upload a shapefile. So let's say you were previously managing your data on a separate platform and you have all your boundary files as shapefiles. You can upload those shapefiles by using the button here. For this example, we'll be using trace map. We're going to assume that we have data recorded in here already, which we do, the grain harvest data from 2020. And we'll select the drop-down caret under trace map. You'll notice we have a simple and a detailed trace option here, which allow us to complete the trace boundary in the same way we would with the boundary sensitivities in SMS. In SMS, we had that fine, medium, and coarse predefined settings. Within AgFiniti, we have a simple and a detailed trace. The simple trace is going to look more like the coarse setting that we used in SMS, whereas the detailed trace is going to look more like the fine setting that we had in SMS. I'll first demo the simple trace here by selecting simple. In the background, AgFiniti is going to look at my operation data and trace along the outside of that operation. Once it's traced, it will appear here, and automatically it's going to set it as the official set field boundary. That's what the green star next to the existing boundaries mean. It means that it's an official set field boundary that can be then used for managing your data, analyzing your data, creating prescriptions. All of those things do require you to have an official set field boundary within AgFiniti. So ensuring that you have that green star is going to be important. Now, what does it look like when you don't have a green star or when you have multiple existing boundaries to choose from? If I choose the drop down here and select a detailed trace, first, our map will look just a little bit different in the way that there is going to be more cutouts or waterways traced within the existing or the field boundary, but it's also going to be gray. In the first option here, I used a simple trace, meaning I had a larger gap diameter and interior area that I ignored as I was tracing the field. With a detailed trace, on the other hand, you can see that we have many more things outlined within the field where maybe our GPS dropped out, waterways missed, or auto swaps might have been turned off. You can toggle between the two to make it the official set field boundary by choosing the green star. Once you've selected the existing boundary that you would like to stick with and use year after year to manage your data, you can choose that green star and choose Done. Of course, you have editing tools that allow you to edit the boundary, similar to SMS, or you can delete those field boundaries out if you wanted to retire field boundaries in the past. One other thing I'll draw your attention to on the screen while we are here is that the acre count is different. For our simple trace at the top, we notice we have an acre count of 90.64 acres. However, with a detailed trace, we see almost a 3-acre decrease with the 87.79 acres. This will be important if you were to report these acres to insurance agencies or the government. You can choose Done at the bottom here to exit out of this screen. And you'll notice we have a notification at the top saying our data has been updated. Please refresh the page. Once I refresh that page, I now have the option under No Year, that's where boundaries will be automatically stored, to look at my boundary operation. In SMS and AgFiniti, we have the option of No Year to reference the boundary over and over year after year. So you don't have to go searching through all your years to find that boundary. Boundaries will automatically be stored under No Year in AgFiniti, and for SMS, you have the option to move your boundary to No Year. Once you have these boundaries set, as I mentioned in AgFiniti, you can begin analyzing data, but after you analyze data, you want to do something with these boundaries. You probably want to export them out to the display to be used in the field. That's the whole point of data management, to be more efficient in the field. We can do so by going to the wrench once again, choosing Export, Display Setup, and this is going to create a setup file for our display. Within this panel here is where we'll be selecting the information we would like to export out to the display, so specific growers or all of them, along with our crop plans, variety tracking, and tile. I'll draw your attention to the checkbox here, which is on by default to include active boundaries. So long as this is on, it's going to export all of the active field boundaries that we have selected. Remember, the active field boundaries are the ones with the green star to be used out in the display. This is going to save you headaches from after you log all of your data, making sure it's categorized nicely within the display and imported back into the software, whether that be SMS or AgFiniti, to be used for data management in the future. That was using the trace boundary tool within AgFiniti. If you have any questions about that, I do invite you to drop that in the chat. That completes the very first Learn One New Thing webinar series. I will put up a survey here for you all to complete since we are nearing the end. If you like what you saw here, then please join us for instructor-led training over SMS. You can review those courses at the academy.agleader.com. Each week or every other week, we'll be hosting a Learn One New Thing webinar series where we hope you learn one new thing. We did start today with boundaries because boundaries are the most important thing when it comes to managing data. We'll be building on this topic as we go through different segments within this webinar series, but we do hope you'll tune in again on June 18th. Thank you once again for attending this webinar. I hope you